once upon a time is a more effective beginning than thou shalt not, because a lot of times that's the way that a truth is lodged in the human heart.
Welcome back. We're here for another episode of Cultivating Truth. My name is Aaron Davis, and today I get the great opportunity of sitting down with filmmaker Richard Ramsey. Richard, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Richard is the co-director for the up-and-coming film titled Unsung Hero, which is about the upbringing of For King and Country and Rebecca St. James. So now my family and I are big Rebecca St. James and For King and Country fans. And so I want to hear more about you and yourself. Tell us a little bit about you and how did you get pulled into this project and this movie?
Yeah, so I'm a filmmaker based here in the Nashville area, which is where we are. And I moved here in 2019 to work for Kingdom Story Company, and I had written a pilot for a script that was set in the mid 1900s. And John Irwin, who directed or co-directed I Can Only Imagine with his brother Andy, he was like, "Hey, you're really good at period pieces. Well, I want to pair you with the Smallbone brothers on this project." That's Joel. At the time, it was Joel and Luke are the For King and Country duo, but they also have a brother named Ben who's a really good filmmaker in his own right. And so he was saying, they're wanting to do this project set in the Civil War, and I'd love for you to partner with them. So I was kind of partnering with them on a project that we worked on, and that collaboration went really well. But then when the COVID pandemic happened, everything just kind of got shut down and shelved. And so around that time, they decided to pivot to something like a little less ambitious as far as scale and scope. And they pivoted to telling their family's migration story from Australia to America. And so because our previous collaboration had gone really well, they approached me about coming on board to write it with them and to be the screenwriter. And so I agreed. And that was kind of how we got started on that. Yeah. And so through that process, eventually it worked out for me to be able to co-direct it with Joel, but that's how I got started that's how the beginning started.
Okay, so no prior ties to For King and Country until...
Right. I mean, I'd seen them in concert, and it's kind of weird to think about now because Luke, pretty much at every concert, Luke tells their family story in conjunction with their relationship with Compassion International, which is a ministry that helps particularly needy children. And so that kind of tied in with their own story because when they came to America, as you see in the film, they were basically living hand to mouth until their sister kind of hit it big. And so I'd heard the story from them telling it on stage, but I wasn't, evaluating it all in a movie context. I just found it a compelling and moving story. And so it's interesting in retrospect to see how Providence kind of opened the doors for us to work together in telling that story that I heard so long ago, never dreaming that it would be such a huge part of my own life.
Yeah, I mean, this has taken years, right?
Yes. So they actually first approached me about it in September of 2020. And so, as often happens in this business, you kind of work on multiple things at once, or you'll work on something for a time, set it aside, and then do something, come back to it. So it wasn't like a continuous job, but off and on from about 2020 till about June of 2022. And then around then it kicked into like every day, hours a day. And then we went into shooting in October of 2022.
Wow. Now, I've heard the story by watching this, I think 3 times now before it's hit theaters. But I've heard the story from producer Josh Walsh, who talked a little bit about how you got approached and your thoughts when you heard the original pitch as Joel Smallbone from For King and Country. This is his movie about his family, and he's going to direct it. And by the way, he's going to play his father, right?
Right. So when they're approaching, first of all, when anyone ever approaches you with, hey, I would love my story to be a movie. Let me tell you my really great story. You're always like, huh, or not always, but often, more often than not, I would even say, you're like, oh, wow, that's really interesting, but it's not that interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's like, it's compelling, but is it a movie? And, so one thing, it was like, okay, yeah, great story, but is it a movie? And as they were telling me more and more details of the story, and even more details than what they're able to share in the allotted time they have at their concerts, I was, it just was clear that there were movie moments, that it had the makings of a great movie. It had what we would call like movie beats, and, and even some of it was, I'll go and share this brief scene because it happens in the first 15 minutes. But, one of the things they told me is, yeah, our dad received basically devastating financial news that like cinched the fact that he was financially ruined.
Yeah.
And so he learns this and then gets out of his car and walks into his house to his 40th surprise birthday party.
Oh my God.
Well, the surprise party for his 40th birthday. And that's just amazing. Like if I were just writing that whole cloth, making it up out of whole cloth, I would be like, that's a little too much. Just things like that. And then the other thing that, you're just kind of wary of is like, I know those guys really well by now and I know their hearts. So part of me is like, okay, I know that you don't want, speaking as if I'm thinking of this as if I'm speaking to Joel. It's like, I know you don't want this to be a vanity project, but one misstep and it can easily come across that way. You're sort of spearheading telling your own family story in a movie. You're going to play your own dad. You're going to co-direct. Like, it would be easy to inadvertently communicate this as some kind of vanity project. So there was just some caution going into it of how to sort of steer away from that. And so, but one thing that helped from the start, and we would fine tune this even more as we go, but it was really important and apparent from the start that it should be an honor project for their parents. And then more specifically, as we kind of got more into it, for their mother, and to some extent, even their older sister. I think as long as all of the sort of glory and honor was diverted to the parents and Rebecca on their behalf, that would keep it from being like an insufferable glory project for them.
Yeah. Well said. I really like that you said that because I believed that at first. When I heard the title Unsung Hero, I didn't think that this was about a family story.
Right.
I thought that this was just going to be about for King and Country and their upbringing and childhood story. And, quite frankly, my thoughts were, what if I don't care about their childhood story? I do not think that at all after watching the movie a handful of times. Even the first time I watched it, I thought that this was a great, honorable story for, one, Rebecca St. James. I didn't know much about her growing up, but her story and her family story. And so, I thought it was so beautiful. And if that was a fear, I think that you guys accomplished the task of not making it a vanity project.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because she's an unsung hero in her own right, which may seem odd to say to someone who's like won a Grammy and, has performed in front of thousands of people. But I think, some just sort of behind this, just sort of the struggles that led up to her success and the way that, like the movie says, she was able to do what she did without ever losing her soul. And so the private sort of behind the scenes struggles that any artist has to sort of keep their soul and their integrity, a lot of people don't see that. And so they may give you accolades for your performances or for your ministry and your outward facing, platform stuff, but they don't always see kind of the behind the scenes, that you're the real deal behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And so I think, while I'm somewhat protective of maintaining the unsung hero moniker for, Helen, there's heroism is a theme in the movie. And I think there's a lot of characters in the story with which different audience members can deeply identify. And I think the film does honor Rebecca as well. And I'm proud of that.
I think so. Yeah. I don't want to give too much away because this episode will be released right at the time that the movie is premiering. And And seriously, I mean, every time we have seen this movie, you know, I first saw it by myself with other filmmakers, and I immediately went home, told my wife about it, and said, "You got to see this movie. You're going to love it." Then getting a chance to bring them on board, and then bringing our family, and we've already shown it to our in-laws and some friends, and we have a lot of people really excited about it. But I don't want to give away too much. But you know, there's a lot of talk about what kind of genre are you all going for? You know, I would say that this is a great family movie. But would you, you know, explicitly say that this is a Christian film?
That's an interesting question because, and if I may say so, and I kind of think I may say so in part, one of the gifts of collaboration is it can give you some objectivity about the work. You know, it's not all on me. I didn't do it all on my own. I had a great co-director. I had a great DP, great actor. So it's just such a highly collaborative effort that I just feel this sort of quiet, steady confidence in the movie that I don't care if people call it a Christian movie.
Mm.
You know, like some people bristle at that. And I'm like, if you want to call it that, that fine. It doesn't really bother me because, and I say that because there has been kind of a legacy of conversations of, oh, is it a Christian film or is it a film with Christian themes? Am I a Christian filmmaker? Am I a filmmaker who happens to be Christian? And I used to get kind of, you know, kind of pull my hair out a little bit over that back in the days of like making the song or, you know, when the industry was kind of forming and congealing. But for some reason on this film, I don't really care that much if people label it that. I will say this, it's clearly got faith as a component and the characters are clearly Christians, but it was important to us to just do all of that and handle all of that as artfully as possible. I think another thing I've settled into is I just don't necessarily think religious art or Christian art is inherently incompatible with good art. And you know, back in like way back in the day, you look, I mean, granted, it's a different medium and it's a different time and a different culture, but you know, if you look at Handel's Messiah, it's overtly Christian and no one's going, you know, you really, this is a little on the nose. It's just great art, you know? And so, I'd love to see films kind of get back to that where the culture kind of understands, well, just because it's religious, just because it's overtly Christian doesn't necessarily mean that it's not good.
Yeah.
That said though, I do think, I think it's, you know, there's a fine line between subtle and vague, and there's a fine line between clear and on the nose. And I think we're subtle and clear rather than on the nose or vague. And even if we don't call it a Christian film, and even if we are adamantly opposed to it being called that, someone's going to call it that and it's going to stick.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of glad I just have peace about it and just have kind of a quiet confidence in the movie itself as a story and as a movie.
Yeah. One of the things that I really, really liked about this film, and you know, I could go on and on about each and every scene and ask you a series of questions, and maybe one day we'll get a chance to do a part 2 and discuss, you know, each and everything that I would love to dive into. But I really want people to go out and see the film in theaters. But for myself and for my family, we really enjoyed how you guys handled family and faith. You know, for our family, these subjects of prayer and family gatherings to talk about how we need to rely on God, you know, this is everyday life. And so I felt, one, well represented, but two, encouraged as a filmmaker that there are film subjects that, you know, represent myself and my family. And I think you guys just did a really well job handling the subject of faith. So what did that look like beforehand? Did you guys have a lot of discussions about how you guys were going to handle it? Was too much, anything like that?
Yeah, so I don't remember. I think it was, you know, I don't remember like, let's have this conversation dedicated to this topic of how we execute. I think just as we went, whether it was in note sessions or when Joel started, you know, more heavily collaborating on the script towards that final push, I think we just kind of intuitively sensed, you know, when something was too on the nose or cheesy or, you know, I think so we just kind of felt it as we went. But we also, all come at it from an approach of more of a sort of parables approach.
Yeah.
And again, you have depictions of characters that do pray, but I think we just all had, I think we were just all from the beginning kind of like-minded at the start on how to execute some of that stuff. And then I would say, in keeping with what you said, and also maybe with a little caveat on what I said earlier, is while I think the film is clear about what these characters believe,
Mm-hmm.
and it's pretty clear that their prayers are answered throughout the course of the film, I think people who are not religious or not particularly religious,
Yeah.
or I think they will actually. I think there's a good likelihood that many people who file into that camp will really like the movie.
Yeah.
I think the exceptions would be like, if you're kind of like Reddit YouTube atheist who just recoils at anything that even remotely has a religious vibe,
Yeah.
then sure, like stay home. but I think if you're like generally open-minded or think there's a higher power, as if that's how you would prefer to put it, I think you could come to this movie and be moved and really enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, I just thought that the story was just about the family. I mean, as a dad, I mean, if you're going into it as a fellow father, be prepared that this is going to hit the heartstrings.
Yeah.
And there was a moment in the film where Joel playing his dad, where he just makes this look that I believe is a look that every male, especially father, but someone who has to provide for their family, they go through. And he makes this face, doesn't say the problem. It doesn't, at this point in the film, acknowledge what he's internally going through.
Mm-hmm.
But as a male, I know what he's going through. I know that sense that his pride is hurt and he doesn't want to talk about it, and he is taking this hard, humble pill. And I think that you guys did such a great job where acknowledging that the dad is going through struggles and hurdles in his life.
Mm-hmm.
You do not emasculate him.
Right.
You don't have to tear him down in order to positively shed light on the mother and the rest of the family, which I thought was very well done.
Oh, good. Yeah. And what's been inspiring too from, to go through this process of screening it for audiences is, though there's a lot of framing of, Helen, the mother, as the unsung hero, a lot of men see the movie and deeply identify with David.
Yeah.
And so that's been exciting. So I hope that anyone watching this isn't, I think if there's any men watching this, please don't conclude, oh, well, this is a mom movie for moms.
Yeah.
And it's very much, the dad is an integral, he's arguably the protagonist, and not to get too academic about it, but sometimes your protagonist and main character could be two different characters. But he's critical to the plot. He has the kind of the biggest arc in growth. And so, it's been really inspiring and encouraging to see how many men deeply identify with him as a character.
Oh yeah, for sure.
We talked a lot about the movie, rightfully so, but I'd really love to go a little bit deeper, on yourself as a director. And, we, mentioned the movie, The Song, earlier, and that was pretty much your baby for a while there, right?
Yes. Yeah. That came out about 10 years ago, and that was my first feature film.
Well, I'd love to hear about how maybe you've seen yourself grown or develop as a filmmaker, from your first feature with The Song all the way up to this huge movie with Unsung Hero. And I don't know if this was purposeful or not, but I'm kind of seeing a genre with music, with The Song being all about a musician, and then Unsung Hero being about real life musicians.
If that's if that's your genre.
Yeah. So music is actually, no matter what it is, I feel like music is really critical to my writing and creative process. In fact, on Unsung Hero, one of the first things I did was I went on Google and just looked up what were the top 40 radio hits in 1991. And then I did it for 92 and 93, just in case the story did in fact go through those years. And it also helped that I turned 13 in 1990. So I was very much a 90s teenager and very much remember the time.
Yeah.
But even then, music was critical to just, how how I create and write. And then I would also say it is interesting to see some parallels between the song and this film.
Mhm.
And one of them is, I'm a big believer that if we're going to go, when it comes to making a movie, I'm a big believer that if we're going to go to all this trouble of, we're going to put on all these costumes and we're going to rig all these lights and find these locations and all the stuff that goes into making a movie, I'm very much of the mind of, let's draw some blood, let's make people really feel and really push the boundaries on kind of what are the ranges of human emotion, and like on our, we're considered a low budget film. I think it looks fantastic, if I may say so, relative to our budget. I think there's some miracles in that regard. But what I mean though is like we're not a Marvel film with like battle or where superheroes battle aliens for the fate of the universe and skyscrapers are collapsing. We don't have that kind of spectacle. But to me, there's a spectacle in just pushing the range of human emotion and seeing what you can get out of actors and what they can get in touch with. And I'm a big believer if like we're gonna go to all this trouble, like on the emotion scale of 1 to 10, like let's get to like a 2 and an 8 at least. I don't like sitting between like a 4 and a 6. And so I think that was apparent in the song. If you look back at that, and I also just want to. A lot of times, whenever you take on a movie, the worst version of that movie comes into your head first, and it terrifies you, and you have that worst version of the movie haunting you as you proceed through this. And, it would have been easy, I think, for Unsung Hero or similarly the song to be kind of saccharine, surface level treatments of some of these stuff. But I very much want to go, okay, what are the deeper layers that you can go to? And so it was, just sort of exploring like the depths of human emotion, even when you believe, because there's this sort of idea that, well, once you believe in God and Jesus and you believe in this redemptive arc of the universe and life has meaning, well, then you're only going to get so low in life.
Yeah.
I'm like, well,
yeah,
I don't think that's true. And I'd like to explore, oh, that's not true. So I think those are common themes.
Yeah. No,
So-
I get what you mean when you're saying that this is no Marvel Avengers movie, but I got to point out the obvious here because I couldn't help but think of whenever I was watching this movie. This is no Robert Downey Jr., but this is kind of the Avengers of the CCM, and popular Christian media.
Oh, yeah.
These days, I mean, you got what for King and Country, Rebecca St. James, Candace Cameron Burr. I saw Lucas Black in there, lead singer of Lady A.
That's right. It is like Avengers Assemble.
Yeah, you guys have quite the cast, including yourself and producer Josh Walsh from Kingdom Stories.
Yeah. And I hope I didn't come across as disparaging Marvel because I really enjoy the vast majority of those films. I just saying, well, when you can't deliver on this,
oh yeah,
try to really deliver where you can.
yeah.
And so, and again, it's a totally different type of movie. And I actually think people are longing for, in the aftermath of all the Marvel stuff, which again has been great. I think people are longing for some like human character studies.
Oh, for sure.
And so I think that was an area where I saw a chance for us to excel. And when we strove for that.
Did you grow up liking superheroes?
I did. I mean, actually, it's funny. When I was 3, my parents banned me from playing I would pretend to be all the superheroes, but they banned me from pretending to be the Hulk because I broke the coffee table. I hulked out and like flipped the coffee table over. And it broke. And so I wasn't allowed to be the Hulk anymore.
Yeah.
So as someone who watched the big screen growing up, now you yourself get the opportunity to take your family to the theater to watch something that you've created. And what's that like?
To see a movie that I made in theaters? I mean, it's incredible. And I really do try with all the just, especially now as everything's ramping up to release it, I try to take time to just enjoy it, and just, and to not take it for granted, because it's so easy when things just come a step at a time and in increments at a time to lose track of where you've come from and how you got there. And so I really do try to just sort of, okay, and all the craziness, try to take it in. And then also with the song, that there was quite a gap between that film and this one. And so also just trying not to take it for granted, because, you never know when you're going to get to do it again.
Mhm.
I think a lot of assume, well, once you make one, then it's just a matter of making them one after the other. And that's not necessarily the case. So I don't know what this will lead to. Hopefully it leads to more opportunities to make more films, but I'm not promised that. So I'm trying to just enjoy this process as it goes.
Yeah, yeah. You said earlier, as a filmmaker, wanting to go deep within your story. In your words, let's draw some blood and get deep on the emotional impact. Would you say for yourself and like future projects that's how you would like to be defined as a storyteller?
I think so. And I think part of it too is, I actually got a degree in theater and had aspirations to be an actor before I found writing and directing. So sometimes I often approach projects from an actor's mindset. And so I like to give actors roles that they want to play, like, oh, if a role like that, I could really, I try to write for actors in that way. And I think I'll always do that.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I'm really looking forward to those future projects, and I can't wait to see how you continue to flesh that out as a filmmaker. But I can't help but go back to 3-year-old version of yourself hulking out and being inspired by the popular superheroes of that time. I'm curious, though, what else inspired a young Richie Ramsey when you're watching cinema? Any filmmakers or classic stories that put that twinkle in your eye saying, hey, I want to be a filmmaker one day. I want to do this?
Yeah. So I was born in 1977, and my parents went on a movie date and carried me in the little baby carrier, and that movie was Star Wars. So like any filmmaker born 5 years before or 5 years after that is like, it's all about Star Wars. Like it all comes back to Star Wars. So that was pivotal. I think some of my earliest cinematic memories, go back to that. So just, that shaped, I think, my imagination. It shaped my love of movies. And then of course there were like the classic superhero movies, even then, like Christopher Reeve's Superman, pivotal. And then I think when I got into theater in high school, that's when I started really liking period pieces. And like, I loved Kenneth Branagh, like his Henry V, and then later his Hamlet. I loved Mel Gibson's Hamlet. And then, Braveheart, I saw that, like, that came out right after I graduated high school.
Yeah.
And I would say that movie, even if you could go on to argue that there have been movies that have come out since that are better made, I don't think any movie has ever made me feel the way that movie made me feel at the time.
Yeah.
And that was, I think that was pivotal. I love the Coen brothers in general. So, I like their kind of quirkiness and their kind of edge they kind of have to a lot of their movies. But I've just been drawn a lot of times to kind of actor driven movies. Like as epic as like Braveheart was, it really hinged on
Mel Gibson.
really compelling, performances by Mel Gibson and various actors in the story. And so just like, I really like, and also I think I liked period pieces again, because of my theater background, I just like, and again, I'm like, well, if we're going to go to all this trouble to tell a story, like, well, let's put some costumes on and make this legit,
Let's go all out.
So yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so you keep mentioning theater background, and I teach a lot of theater, so just fun question. What would you say is the most fun character that you've ever had to portray back in the day on stage?
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. So my sophomore year in college, I got to play John Merrick in The Elephant Man. John Merrick is the Elephant Man. So for those of you who may not know, he was a very severely deformed. He had a bone and tissue disease that like left him severely deformed. And he was put into like Victorian circus sideshows as like a freak, basically, for people to come observe.
Wow.
And there's a famous movie about it that stars Anthony Hopkins and John Hurt. And he sort of rescued that from a doctor who introduced him to high society. And like the story, both the play and the movie deal with, well, did you just exchange one kind of circus for another? But it's a real sort of exploration of the human spirit and his fundamental humanity that shines through even through this deformity. And so that may be like way more of a side note than you wanted on any of this.
Good.
But it was a role I got to do and really desperately wanted to do. And again, it had a lot of the things I love, like period piece, actor, character driven, British. I love, I'm a big Anglophile. So yeah, that's one that stood out. And then I also just loved Shakespeare. I've done I've been privileged to be part of really great productions of that and some not so great ones. But yeah, it's just, he's fantastic. And I think this may sound grandiose, but I mean this very aspirationally. He's still an influence. Just, again, you don't get to do the stuff he did, like, and no one wants you to, and I don't want to. I don't want to write in verse with heightened language and stuff, but just, but yeah, and I'll never get there. But like, it's still just good to have like as an aspiration and just fundamental principles that you can take away and use in your own work.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. I did not know that about you. It's really cool to see that Shakespeare had that sort of impact. Now, I do know from our previous talks that there's a certain humongous band that's out there that had an impact on you, and that's because I've seen your Office, and yeah, there's no escaping that. The Beatles. Tell me a little bit about the Beatles. I mean, obviously, you've already mentioned how much music plays a huge impact on your storytelling. So tell me about how the Beatles have made an impact on your life.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because this movie Unsung Hero set, in the early 90s, and growing up, I listened to a lot of Christian music, and most of it, if I'm being honest, by force. Not mean I was like tied down to a chair, but it's like, this is what my mom and parents would listen to in the house. I'd hear it on car trips. And a lot of it I genuinely liked, especially Rich Mullins. I loved Rich Mullins. And I really liked Michael W. Smith. But around the time of this movie, around the time that Rebecca, right before she kind of comes into her slot, I discovered the Beatles. And, I grew up in a Christian home. My parents were pretty guarded about what I could watch or listen to. But I think I got to a point where they were like, okay, the Beatles are safe. Like, any sort of cultural cutting edge, scary stuff they were doing was like long in the rearview mirror. So now it's just what kind of just remained of them was their music.
Yeah.
And so, and my mom had listened to them growing up and loved them. So she was like, okay, that you could listen to worse things than the Beatles. But I remember I was 16 and I had seen the portraits of them from the White Album. And I was like, man, these guys look cool. Like I always saw the Beatles like the Mop Tops, like She Loves You. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But then I later discovered they had this whole other era, and so I thought they looked really cool. And then I bought this cassette tape that they had in a store in the mall, dating myself totally. And I popped it into the car and it was Hey Jude. Yeah. And I listened to that. And when it kind of builds to that better, 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 and it just like explodes. It's like my brain just went, boom. Like it just, and it's funny because it was remarkably simple. They have much more complex songs with much more complex arrangements, but but the simplicity in it was profound to me, like it was. And I think something that I was always drawn to with them, and I think in some ways does affect my own work, is like in a completely different medium, is they were very self-aware of their limitations and their strengths, and they kind of came together, and the whole was greater than the sum of the parts. And they also struck this great balance of creating like actual art while being commercially successful.
Yeah, that's fair.
And not that I would have known to put it in those terms at the time, but I've always been fascinated by that balance. And then I was very intrigued also just by the whole, and again, it's well before my time. They'd been broken up 23 years by the time I like really got into them. But just the whole vibe, like just the whole, like the look and just the way they kind of, the personalities, like, you know, even Ringo is a kind of like, you know, I actually love him as a drummer.
Yeah.
But then what he brought is kind of a jovial mascot of the group and just like the fun personality. And I just think they were all like a critical component. And I was always just fascinated by the mysterious inner working of a collaborative effort that does this really great stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I totally relate. You know, I definitely wasn't alive back whenever they came out, but I grew up, you know, with my family members listening to, you know, classic Beatles, thinking of the mop tops and, you know, that classic black and white.
Right.
And I think the thing that I always think is so fascinating is the 10 years. You know, they were only around for 10 years, but they put out so much music. And I think one of the coolest things is, you know, them reinventing themselves with Sergeant Pepper's, you know, going behind the pseudo name, where it's like, if you know, if this doesn't work out, then this was just for fun. And it makes me wonder how many other artists have the ability to do that. You know, if they did not have the pressure of maintaining their identity as an artist and they could, you know, venture out, do something a little bit different. I'd love to see what other people could do out there. And I just think that they, you know, have had a stellar career because they were able to reinvent themselves.
Well, I think also was a critical component of their success too, is they had a producer, George Martin, who let them do that.
Yeah.
Like, you know, the typical story with a music group is you find your niche and you find your thing that makes you successful, but then all the suits want to keep you in that box and you can't grow.
Yeah.
And he was like, sure, write a song about the orphanage you grew up next to. I'll bring in some orchestration. We'll make this thing amazing, you know? And it's like, he let him do it. And it's like, it's amazing that he did. And it's amazing what they did because he did, you know? And so there's just so many dynamics to it that I was always just really fascinated by. And I do think for me, it is a template of like, yeah, you need some like business savvy people around you, but even they need to have some sort of artistic sensibility or passion or, you know, so yeah, it's just, and you know, again, sort of their, yeah, I'll just stop.
No, man. This is a lot of fun. I appreciate that. Yeah, we're just having fun here. So, you know, we've talked about breaking coffee tables as Hulk. We've talked about Shakespeare, Beatles. Now let's go back to 2024 and, you know, your moments before your movie hits theaters everywhere. And I'm just curious about your thoughts on the industry in general and generally with the arts. You know, Are you optimistic? Are you excited to see where things are going? I mean, you guys are kind of spearheading the pack.
It's wild because like this movie business, you know, is changing constantly, you know. So streaming was really disruptive. And then just as and I don't even know if we've gotten over that disruption. So maybe even before you can get over that disruption, here comes AI and who knows what that's going to do. Here's one thing I suspect, and it may be wish casting. I think there's a lot of movies where you kind of go, yeah, sure, I'd watch that if a robot wrote it, because I've watched a lot of movies that may as well have been written by a robot, you know, like, but I do wonder if faith-based films to some extent might be insulated from that, because I mean, do you want to watch someone's profound spiritual journey as written by a soulless robot or a computer? You know, like, do you want to watch a movie based on the life of Mother Teresa written by a computer?
Yeah.
You know? And so I wonder if, you know, do you want to watch a movie, you know, like if The Chosen season 7 were written by AI, like, would you tune in to watch that?
Yeah.
You know? And again, I don't mean to spread rumors inadvertently. I'm just saying, like, there are certain things where I think you intuitively sense, like, I want to relate to another human being.
Yeah.
I don't want to see some computer's sort of facsimile or simulacrum, is that the word, of what the human experience is. I want to, you know, especially when you're dealing with people's sort of spiritual lives.
Yeah.
So I actually feel like if Christian artists and aspiring Christian artists can up their game, you know, they have a chance to kind of take an inside lane because, you know, if what we say is true, and I believe it is, you know, we value the soul. We are in relationship with the creator of the body and the soul. And we should have really profound things to say that can't be said by robots.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing, and I don't, you know, this may be a dangerous can of worms to get into, but I think another way, like, so 10 years ago when the song came out, one of the distinctive traits of a Christian movie would be, well, they're preachy. They're very message driven and not story driven. 10 years on, I don't know if you can still say that is a distinctive of faith-based movies. I think a lot of people feel that most movies are becoming message driven and they're kind of bristling under that. And I actually think in some ways, Christian movies could take, again, an inside lane by not haranguing their audience, but just sort of telling a compelling story that provokes, that forces, again, sounds like haranguing, but leaves the audience unavoidably dealing with some questions. So that's kind of my sort of evaluation of the state of the industry.
Yeah, I really do agree with that. You know, on your thoughts of just kind of the soullessness. You know, we watched the Marvel series Secret Invasion. I don't know if you had a chance or not to.
I didn't watch it. No, not yet. Yeah.
Samuel L. Jackson, Nick Fury's character, and it's so funny because when you see the intro, and I didn't know any context prior, but it's this interesting looking animation, no talking or singing or anything like that. And I actually used the word soulless when I was talking with someone else. I was like, I'm just not really a fan of this intro. It just looks like, yeah, it's without a soul. And I was telling that to somebody, and they said, "Oh, you haven't heard?" Like, no, what are you talking about? They said that intro to Secret Invasion is actually through AI. I'm like, no way. Are you serious? They said, yeah, I was like, a lot of controversy because it's putting animators out of a job and whatnot.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, not even knowing that, just interesting on how the concept of, even when we look at a piece of art, that we're seeing the character or the soul of the creative that's inspiring and making the art. Just really interesting concept with the whole AI versus the artist.
Well, like, there's a pretty famous quote by C.S. Lewis where he says, "We read to know we're not alone." I think we write or create art for that same reason, and I think we watch movies for that same reason. You know, and is something created by AI going to tell you you're not alone? It it may make you feel all the more lonely.
Yeah, you know? It does. Way to go deep there, and way to bring in C.S. Lewis.
But it may sound like I'm a guy who's like, you know, fighting to keep his profession alive. But I do think there's just something about art that has to come from the human soul. And I just don't know if an AI or a robot can ever do that. And I do believe that there's just something fundamentally intangible and unique and divine and divinely created about the human soul that I just don't know if any technology is going to get to.
Now, Richard, with what we do with our organization at Aletheia Legacy, you know, everything that we do, we are about discipling creatives and, you know, creating beauty with excellence that's going to be inspiring the world and culture is very important to us. And, you know, we oftentimes find this disconnect with the artists and creatives and the church. And so with you yourself, grounded in your faith, grounded in your artistry and your ability as a storyteller, what's maybe some forms or words of encouragement that you could give us as creatives, but also for those who are in the church and maybe they just don't know how to approach the creative arts?
So there's a journalist and cultural commentator I like named Peter Hitchens. He's actually a Christian and the brother of the famous atheist Did I say Christopher or did I say Peter
Yeah,
first?
no, you said Peter,
yes.
but Christopher, he's one
and
of the
if
four
he sees
horsemen.
this by any chance, he's gonna be like, "Oh, great, he mixed me up with my brother." But yeah, Christopher Hitchens was the famous atheist. His brother Peter is a Christian, and I remember him saying that if you want to persuade someone of something, once upon a time is a more effective beginning than thou shalt not. Mm. And thou shalt not is necessary. It's God gives us some thou shalt nots, but he also gives us in the Bible a lot of stories, because a lot of times that's the way that a truth is lodged in the human heart. And that's how Jesus communicated a lot of his message. So I think there's inherent value in that creativity of telling stories. And sometimes we tell stories just in a single portrait or in music. And I think a lot of Christianity in America, or in the Western world especially, is very utilitarian. Like we go, if it is functional and immediately apparent that it's functional, then it is valuable. If it doesn't have immediate and apparent functionality, then it's less valuable. But I would encourage ministry leaders or leaders in American Christianity to shift and play the long game, because I think there's just something about art that goes beyond rhetoric, it goes beyond reason, it goes beyond intellectual rigidity and guardedness against certain things. It goes through that to the heart. And sometimes, that's often to change the mind, you have to reach the heart first. And sermons can do that, and the music in churches can do that, no question. But there's a unique capacity for art to do it, and to do it in a unique way. And so I would just encourage artists to lean into their gifts, but also like lean into God's provision, because it can be scary to be an artist. You have to trust God to like open doors for you. You have to trust him to guide your steps and to encourage you along the way. And then as he's encouraging you along the way, often what he will do is he will allow frustrations and setbacks and disappointments to come, because that shapes your character. And I have often found to my frustration that God cares more about my character than my work. And so be prepared for that. But also, if you feel called to do this, then pursue it passionately, and just do it in prayer and leaning on him to open doors. And then I would say to, again, the leaders and gatekeepers and pastors and clergy and all that stuff, to just encourage your artist, cultivate your artist, and allow them to communicate the same truths you communicate week in and week out in different ways. And I think last thing I would say is, it can be easy to rail on Hollywood and say, well, they, promote all these things that are antithetical to our values and all this stuff. I actually think that if more artists were cultivated, more Christian artists were cultivated, and they were able to do quality work, then I think there's a lot of people who, I think there's a lot of great and gifted artists who go into like the more mainstream movie business because that's the only place they know there is to go. But I think if they knew they could do quality work that had inherent dignity, that gave them dignity, that they didn't feel they had to compromise things they feel a little uneasy about, I think a lot of them would come and work with us.
Yeah.
And that would just, again, facilitate even better work. So if you're an artist and you feel called to do it passionately and prayerfully. And then if you're a parent or clergy who has creatives in your midst, I would encourage you to encourage them.
No, beautifully said. Thank you so much for that. I mean, that's, why we do even this podcast. That's why we're here, is, cultivating truth, is, culture does not belong to, what is secular. Culture is shaped and cultivated through the creatives, and it doesn't belong to the world. This can be a way for Christians to express themselves in a way that we can live out our lives. And coming full circle, I think that you guys have done that with Unsung Hero, because, for myself, when I watch Unsung Hero, I without hearing a Bible verse, I want to be a better husband, a better father. I want to love my kids. I want to chase after my dreams, and I want to bring my family on board with this mission of this thing that we called life, and do it to the best of our ability for the glory of God. And you didn't have to spoon feed a Bible verse for me to walk away with that. So great job with what I would say is cultivating truth, using a piece of artwork to showcase the revealed word of God with truth.
Yeah, thank you very much. And yeah, this is the part where I tell you it's April 26th. And what a lot of people don't know is that in the movie business, opening weekend is critical. So there's sometimes where you go, oh, it'll be in theaters. It'll be, oh, wow, I'll go. So it's like, so it comes out on Friday, April 26th. We'll know easily well before that Sunday afternoon whether the film is considered a success or not, and if it will enable us to go on to tell more great and edifying stories. So it's critical to get support opening weekend. So yeah, April 26th, and I believe it's unsunghero.movie is the website.
Can we start reserving those seats now?
Oh yeah, tickets are on sale now. There's even early access screenings on Wednesday, April 24th in many areas, likely yours. And even if not, it's in theaters everywhere on April 26th.
Okay. All right. Well, I know that my family has really enjoyed the film, and we are going to gather a group together, and we are telling everyone else to go out and go see the film. And so now for you, the listener, this is your turn. Go out April 26th. Or 24th, if you have access to an early screening on the Wednesday before. Go out, support this film. We need more films like this. So go out and be ready to be encouraged. Talk about it with other believers, and take somebody who just wants to hear a good story, and show these guys your support, because box office weekend, they need your help. And Richard, thank you so much for being on
Absolutely.
the podcast with us. And I cannot wait to see how this story goes.